Good morning again. I'm Chris Potter, and I work for a startup, Ithaca Clean Energy. We develop digital solutions to support the offshore wind industry. We have partners around the world. The title of this panel is Building Sustainable Offshore Wind Industry in California. In this panel, we're going to delve into a broad industry perspective of what is needed to meet California's offshore wind potential, including roadblocks, paths forward to build a sustainable industry and to meet AB 525 planning goals. Joining me on this panel are Tony Appleton, Ed Manning, and Eric Picard. And I'd like to give them each a few minutes to introduce themselves and maybe to provide a little bit about how they entered this industry and maybe something interesting about their background as well.
Okay.
Start with Tony.
I'll go first. Hi, good morning, everyone. Tony Appleton. I'm the offshore wind director at Burns & McDonnell. I'm also managing director of a small company called Green Power Global. I've been involved in offshore wind for about 20 years. I got an interesting stat thrown at me the other day. Apparently, the number of projects I've been involved with, if you exclude China, I've been involved with 1 in 5 of every offshore wind project globally. So it's quite interesting, doing everything from feasibility, viability, all the way through to operation and maintenance. So yeah, I've been, I guess you could say, been there, seen it, done it. The only bit I haven't done so far is decommissioning, which I think there's 1 project being decommissioned so far. So yeah, it's a great industry. I love it. I've been involved in power all of my life. Starting with coal-fired power stations, nuclear, onshore renewables, but for the last 20 years I've been doing offshore, and I'm very, very passionate about it. So hopefully that will come across today. But those who know me probably know that already. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. So my name's Eric Picard. Just want to mention I'm filling in for my colleague Rick Umoff, who was on the panel yesterday. So hopefully I'll be able to fill in his big shoes here today. I also just want to acknowledge Offshore Wind California and Adam and the hard work that they put into hosting us this year. It's lovely to be in the city of trees, as they say here in Sacramento. So my my path into offshore wind is an interesting one. I previously, prior to moving out here to California, I've been here about 1.5 years here working for Vineyard Offshore, and we're one of the leaseholders that has a project up off the coast of Humboldt County. And prior to that, I spent the last 13 years working on Martha's Vineyard, working on the community side of offshore wind development, the community advocacy side of things. And I worked extensively on the Vineyard Wind 1 project. And I was very interested in that, but I had previously been working at a bar. I was bartending, and I basically, in 2010, just wiggled my way into a role at a local nonprofit that ended up partnering with Vineyard Wind, and we signed the nation's first community benefit agreement in 2016, which is something that I think we're all really proud of as an organization, and setting the tone for our engagement with local communities, but also with tribal nations and local fishermen as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ed Manning with KP Public Affairs. First, I have sock envy, because if you look at Tony and Chris's socks, there's windmills on there. So play your cards right. Maybe you can get a pair. KP Public Affairs is we're the lobbying firm for Offshore Wind California. Brian White and I, and Brian was on a panel yesterday, have represented the industry for, I don't know, sometimes it feels longer, probably 4 years, 5 years now. Our firm has been involved in the energy industry in California for several decades. For a long time, we represented the oil industry, eventually moved on to broader energy representation. So we're pretty much in every energy space. We were talking earlier about the evolution of the energy and renewable energy industry in California. We represented First Solar when they first came into California. We're in the lithium space at Salton Sea, fusion, Every new technology, we have Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, so we deal with transmission and every aspect of the energy industry in California. And just quickly, when we started representing Offshore Wind California, we couldn't get a meeting with the PUC because they really didn't think the offshore wind industry was real. And I begged Ed Randolph, and he met with us, and we did a white paper, and we convinced him, and the rest is sort of history. So, but it has been a wild ride. I mean, looking back on the last 4 years, incredible evolution in a quick amount of time. So we're just happy to be part of the team and on the ride with all of you.
Thank you for those introductions. Well, we certainly have a deep bench here, and I think well equipped to answer this broad set of questions that I've laid out. I'll start with this. Given the state of play in a landscape of lawsuits from the states, what can we focus on a local level that will encourage communities to engage on the issues? And I'll pick on Eric for that.
No, absolutely. I'd love to take that question. First, I just want to acknowledge a lot of folks from both Humboldt and Del Norte counties that are in the audience today. I don't know. Maybe just acknowledge. I told some folks, but maybe just raise your hands if you're from Humboldt or Del Norte County. There's a lot of folks here. I can't really see very well, but I just want to say that anyone, anybody in this room right now that's thinking about, setting up shop in Humboldt County or working on our projects and, ultimately, building out the supply chain and the local infrastructure up there. These folks in Humboldt County, these are the ones that are going to decide, essentially, I believe, if these projects go forward or not. I think, in my bend is very much from the local community side of things, coming from my Martha's Vineyard experience. These folks are truly, I think, the gatekeepers of the project, and I just want to acknowledge them and just say that the folks in Humboldt and Del Norte County have been extremely welcoming and opening, I think, to offshore wind, and recognizing that the existential crisis of climate change exists, and folks want to do their parts, and so there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for the local community to engage. And to have their voices heard. I also want to acknowledge Dan Jacobson and his hard work. I know that there was, a lot of efforts in getting some of these local voices here into the legislative offices of leaders here in Sacramento to have their local voices heard. So I think that's very critical and really important. And just understanding that there's going to be a lot of checks and balances and processes along the way. In terms of, the ability for the local community to participate and engage. I mean, I think we heard Chris talk about it this morning in terms of the port development process. We'll have opportunities, with I think there's really big news here with the transmission developer that was announced, for our transmission lines up in Northern California. There'll be a very extensive process of engagement there. And then later this year, the AB3 process is going to be going on, which expands on the AB 525. And what AB3 does, it really examines the potential for in-state manufacturing for port, not only for ports, but also just for the state of California, and kind of examining what's possible. And there was a discussion yesterday a little bit about WindLink and building out this local supply chain network. So I just want to give a nod to the folks in Humboldt County as well. But I think that there's a lot that the local communities can do, and just realizing that, they have the power to really influence these projects, and creating kind of what's possible, and really understanding what are the needs of the community and how can we as developers respond to the needs of the community. And be very responsible to what those are.
Thank you. Anybody else care to?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think as Ed mentioned before, the state's done a lot in the last 4 years. There's been a lot of movement, a lot of development, a lot of activity. We've got to keep that going. That's if the state's got to continue to hit the dates it's talking about, deliver the promises, deliver the commitments. it's also got to do things like streamline state approvals. Again, a lot of this has already been talked about, so far today and yesterday. Streamline things, make it as easy as possible for the developers and the industry to get established in the state. If you look at the East Coast, the less when the East Coast started a few years ago, when I was involved a few years ago, we were saying, look at what happened in Europe. Don't make the same mistakes. Try and learn. Try and think about it, try and plan, try and work it out, try and work together. Did they? No. They all did their own thing. And I think that's where California's got the opportunity to look at what Europe has done, what Europe got wrong and what Europe got right, what the East Coast got wrong, and learn from that. But it's all about working together. But it has to be led by the state. It can't be led by the developers. It has to be led by the state. And the state have got to facilitate, the roundtable discussions, get the developers together, get the OEMs together, get the supply chain together, get the local communities together, get the process, whoever's managing the processes together. It has to be coordinated by the state. They've done a great job, but there is still a lot more to do. And I think that's the opportunity that California's got over the next, 2, 3, 4 years, without involving, Washington. There's so much to do locally. There's a real opportunity there, but you've got to learn from what's gone wrong before. Has to do that. You have to do that.
Thanks. Ed?
Well, I think to Eric's point, being a bartender trains you well for interacting with the local community. You have to be able to listen and really understand people's problems. So one thing I will say is that what's unique about this industry is the sort of timeline to get projects done, the long timeline, and the time it takes to scale and the level of commitment it takes. And I think that's a huge benefit at the local level, because I've done a lot of project siting work on any number of different types of projects over the years, everything from housing to energy projects. And a lot of times you have a compressed timeline. It's hard to build trust when you're new and you just jump into a community and you're trying to get a project entitled. This industry has the benefit of building long-term relationships, investing in the communities, really getting to know and understand the communities and set of programs that are of mutual benefit. And I think that's a real advantage. And the great part that I see is Vineyard and all the developers are taking advantage of that and really interacting in a positive way with the communities. And that's a blessing to have the time to do that.
True enough. I'm reticent to draw any conclusions from what has transpired with Empire Wind, but I'm wondering if there are any lessons to be learned from the East Coast that we should be mindful of over the next 4 years. And I see Tony eager to jump in. Okay.
Yeah, I think the problem the East Coast has got, without picking on Empire as one particular project, the problem the East Coast, the biggest mistake they made is every project is different in the East Coast, which means every project is first of its kind, which means every project is expensive. That's the problem. There was no standardized approach, even within a state, within one particular state, the projects were being done differently, and because of the relationships that the developers had with the utilities, the partners, that kind of stuff, it just makes things expensive, and that's back to my point before about having a standardized approach, a standard way of doing things. And if that means the developers sitting down, I know that's kind of goes against the grain a little bit, but the developers sitting down and working together in terms of what's the best approach for the projects, then you can think about, okay, if you do a standardized approach, you help the supply chain, you help the O&M, you help the ports. Everybody gets the benefit of that, rather than everything being different at every single project. If what's happening in Europe now is well, I'll go back 20 years. I saw a slide about 15, 20 years ago, and there were 20 different substations on the slide. And I was asked, okay, how many companies made those substations? I don't know, 5, 6, whatever it was. No, 1. They were all Siemens offshore substations, and every single one of them was different. Every single one of them was first of a kind. So Europe went through that learning curve, but then if you look at what happened, I think it was last year, in Germany, Tenant, the TSO, decided, okay, so what they did, they bought 15 HVDC offshore converters, standard, same size. Everyone was the same. Supply chain loved it. What did that do for the costs? Brought them down. The project costs brought it down. That's the sort of thing that has to be thought about. And that's what California's you've got to do. And that's the mistake the East Coast did not do, because New York knew better than New Jersey, New Jersey knew better than Maryland, and Maryland knew better than Virginia, and Virginia knew better than Massachusetts. They're all doing it their own way. And you've got a chance here, because obviously it's one California. I say that. I am assuming it is. I can get away with it. I'm the Brit in the room, but that's the approach you've got to have. But that means, and that's why it's got to be, as I said, it's got to be led by the state and getting the developers around the table and talking to the developers. The other thing, Chris, as well, is on the planning side, don't necessarily think about, okay, we need to get the planning done for the next 5 projects, the next 7 gigawatts. Think about where you want to be in 2050. Double it, and then plan around that. That's the way to think about it, because then you get that infrastructure in place early, and everybody will come to play, because it's there. The developers will like that. They will like to come over and get involved in that, because they know what to expect. They know what's happening, rather than that individual battle every single project.
I definitely want to delve more into the standardization, but I'm curious what Eric might have to say about lessons learned.
Yes, I mean, I've spending the last 13 years on the East Coast working on offshore wind. I feel like at this point I could probably write a trilogy on lessons learned from the East Coast. And I think at top of mind, I just want to acknowledge AB 1373, which is the central procurement process, which the conversations are starting to kick off now. That's a really critical component for us, and there's a lot of lessons learned, I think, from the East Coast in that process. And what that process is going to allow us to do is to be able to, basically sell our electricity and have a financeable contract with, the Department of Water Research through the state, the utility companies, and then we'll be able to basically get our financing off of the backs of these projects. And I think some of the challenges on the East Coast is de-risking the phase between when these power contracts are awarded and when we actually go to financial close of the project and begin construction. And so it's de-risking on a few different levels. It's de-risking not only for us and our project, but it's also de-risking for the ability for us to be able to complete our project, which ultimately will supply clean, renewable energy to ratepayers in California. So that's I think a really big piece that I think some folks in the conversations that are going to be we're going to be leaning in some of those conversations, and that's I think where some of the stuff is going to be going. I see over the next year, and then I think Tony, you mentioned this. California has a really big advantage of being kind of this single occupier of the coast, not single occupier, but where we're at right now in the state of play. Whereas on the East Coast, it was very challenging, where you had different states competing with each other for procurements, for investments, and ultimately for business. And so competition is good, but I think California, it's a strength of California to be able to lean in and get out in front of that. And I think just want to acknowledge another key lesson learned is early engagement with fisheries and tribal nations. And I just want to also acknowledge the state of California has done a lot of upfront work in the legislative level to ensure that those conversations are happening with the fishermen, and then also acknowledging Assembly Member Stephanie, her bill, AB 1417, which would essentially set up a tribal nation capacity funding program, and acknowledging Assembly Member Stephanie and the work that she did with us, to find a common ground solution with that proposed piece of legislation, and also acknowledging that us on the developer side of things, and us in particular with Vineyard Offshore, we're working really diligently on the ground in Humboldt County to set up a tribal capacity funding program. So these are really key critical pieces in ensuring that folks have a voice at the table early on. As we say, this is we're looking at a 10, 15 year process here, and making sure that people are at the table now and not feeling left behind. And so that's kind of the central theme here. And then that then trickles down to job creation, business opportunities, financial partnerships that will be unlocked as our industry continues to develop and move forward.
Thanks. Ed?
The offshore wind industry, Tony was talking about standardization, and when we started the effort to try to get the legislature and regulatory agencies to think, to be proactive and to create a platform legislatively and from a regulatory environment that would foster the offshore wind industry, if you look at the steps that have been taken, really the foundation is built in a way that is unique for this industry. So we have goals in statute, we have planning goals. Not every industry has had that benefit. You've got agencies with dedicated staff across the board who are focused on offshore wind. You've got partners in the ports who are motivated, and you've got a regulatory scheme that I think is ahead of where it needed to be, and by that I mean, for example, the administration work with the legislature on a package of infrastructure bills and centralized procurement. One of the advantages this industry has is a single permitting agency, if they want to take advantage of it, to go to the California Energy Commission. It's a very intensive permitting process because you have to do so much front-end work, but the benefit is you can be replicated across the industry, and the Energy Commission can issue all the permits, including for other regulatory agencies, which is really unheard of in California. So I think California has done things very differently than the East Coast, and I think the platform is really well built. There's still a lot to do, but I think the platform is there to take advantage of.
Yeah, just one other thing as well. As far as the state's concerned, don't impose things on the offshore wind industry that other industries, don't have to comply with. I think it was mentioned on a panel yesterday that on the East Coast, the CTV has to go out, and it's got to have two people watching where it's going, and watching out for mammals and things like sea life and things like that. And it's got a maximum speed of 10 knots, and yet they're being passed by container ships who are just 30 knots going past them, without lookouts and without things like that. That's not fair. It's just not fair. So that's, the state of, it's an opportunity, back to Ed's point, the state have got an opportunity to make sure that it's a level playing field as much as possible with other industries. That's very, very important, and California can do that. It's, back to my comment about one California. You can do that. You can make it fair over here in a way that the East Coast didn't make it fair.
So going back to this topic of standardization, which is one of my favorite topics because it encompasses so many different facets of offshore wind of the industry. But I think for the sake of the discussion here, I'm going to focus on supply chain staging and deployment. I mean, how do you arrive? What's the best space to have this discussion with the industry? Is it through a legislative action? Is it through a trade organization?
I think it's
Or
probably
legal agreements.
Yeah, I think it's
Tony.
probably facilitated by a trade organization. I wonder who can do that in California.
Is Adam here?
Hey, where is he? Yeah.
You get some socks.
But I think it's getting all the stakeholders around the table, and that's the state, from the state to the developers in particular, talking about what is the best approach that we can have, because every developer will have a preferred supply chain, every developer will have a preferred technology to use. But to get the industry to kick off at a sensible price point, perhaps what California can be the first. The developers actually working together, not necessarily handing over technology the way they do things or anything like that. But what I'm talking about is perhaps the same size of turbines, the same way of doing things, the same way of connecting, the same switch gear. I don't know, whatever it is. But just so what you're doing is you get a consistency of approach, because then, as I mentioned before, there's in terms of training, technicians. It's one technology. In terms of the CTV size, it's one size. In terms of the SOVs, everything's the same. And if you start doing that, then you're bringing the costs down. Because what the last thing you want to do is repeat every project's different. Because if every project's different, the costs aren't going to come down. It's as simple as that. But people have also got to, Chris, people have also got to realize the first projects will be more expensive. Doesn't matter, even if they're all exactly the same, they will be more expensive because it's a new industry. People seem to forget, oh yeah, it's comparing with oil and gas, or it's comparing with coal, or comparing with nuclear, or solar, or onshore, whatever it is. It's a new industry. The costs are always going to be higher. But in 5-10 years' time, once you get that standardization in place, then the costs come tumbling down.
Eric?
I think one thing I want to just discuss too is I think consistency in science. And one thing we've seen on the East Coast, as these procurement processes play out, amongst different states, is developers investing, in different research institutions or higher education institutions, and there's silos that are happening, I think, on the East Coast in terms of research, and different universities maybe working on similar things, but maybe not talking to each other, and so. Again, a little bit of a nod here to the Pacific Offshore Wind Consortium, which is a consortium of Cal Poly Humboldt, Cal Poly SLO, and Oregon State University. I know there's a handful of folks here. So I think getting those conversations and the universities really aligned early, when the developers come to the table and really start to invest, real dollars in science, and then there's a standardization process around the data. A lot of we have those building blocks in place already, and things are not being done in a silo. So I think that's a really kind of important piece as well, because there's going to be a lot of investment that's done in that area, and also making sure that whatever investments are done are very focused and focused. I don't think it's a secret, that a lot of dollars overall, are challenged right now. So making sure that whatever dollars are coming out, from the state, from the developers, from grant dollars, that they're very focused and people are coordinating.
Ed, thanks. Ed, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you think there are any models out there for this discussion around standardization, given your experience? Years of experience in the energy industry.
There are. They're mainly in the public sector. So, for example, there's an entity called SCAPA, Southern California Public Power Authority. All of the public power agencies like Los Angeles Department of Water Power, Burbank, Pasadena, Orange County, municipal utilities will go procure solar projects, large-scale renewable projects through them as one procurement entity, and then they'll bid in to take part of that power supply. There are antitrust considerations and other things in the private sector, but And I wouldn't want the legislature to dictate this because,
wondering,
with all
yeah.
due respect to my legislative friends, you don't want them dictating how a procurement process is going to work for the private sector. But there's nothing that stops the private sector entities if they're willing to give up a little bit of control. But I mean, if they have standardized specifications and they can form an entity, a third-party entity, to do procurement, it could save money and costs. It also helps on the labor side in terms of training and apprenticeship programs if you have some standardization in the industry. So, you know, I think, though, a trade association can facilitate that, but you could set up a third-party entity to do procurement.
Okay. Thank you. Boy, I'd love to sit up here all day and talk about this topic because I just think it's really rich. But I'd be remiss to ask this final question. And how do we, well, there'll be an election and there'll be a new governor at the end of next year. How do we ensure that the next governor supports offshore wind? What should we be doing?
Who are you going to ask that?
I'll ask you. And, yeah.
Well, if you look at the field of candidates currently, I think it's safe to say that, going through my head, probably all of them are supportive of the industry. Some of them have more hands-on experience than others, like Lieutenant Governor, right, Chair of State Lands, and has been supportive of everything that we've tried to do in the industry. Antonio Villaraigosa was the lead for the governor on infrastructure. And not to discriminate against, I don't know, I haven't talked to Katie Porter specifically about this, but I think they'll all be supportive in general. But I think, you know, it's up to the trade associations, individual companies to make sure we're coordinated and getting the message out with our friends in the labor organizations and others that this is really important. You know, for example, the port money we got in the bond, which was another big success for this industry to get, you know, $475 million in the climate bond that's going to go to help the ports build out. That money isn't going to be spent instantly. So there are things for a new administration that they can do to help champion it. And I will say, given the, you know, the political climate, we need a champion, a visible champion in California for this industry to project that California is open for business.
Either. Yes.
yeah,
I
I'll-
think you're both eager. Okay.
Yeah,
go
I'll
for
just
it.
echoing everything that Ed said. Absolutely, and I think you know, just us as an industry continuing to show up is really key right now. You know, we're here. We have a lot of you know, speaking from our project, you know, we have a lot of work that we are doing, that we need to be doing, that can be done, you know, to build this industry up. And there's a lot of, you know, positive news that's come out in the last, you know, few days here, and continuing to build momentum around that, and also understanding, you know, that the energy demand and energy growth is only going to be expanding as, you know, as over the next 10, 15 plus years. So we're going to have to be building new production in offshore wind. You know, we believe is going to be able to meet that demand. You know, 25 gigawatts by 2045, with, you know, outlined in AB 525. That's a lot of energy. I mean, that's, you know, 18, 20 million homes. That's a lot of electricity, clean renewable energy. These are jobs. These are people, you know, going to work every day, being able to afford, you know, to live in the places they want to live and grew up in, and buy a home, and basically live out the American dream. So I think it's about the coalitions and the partnerships that, you know, we've built and we're building today in this room, and just continuing to show up and to let folks know that this industry is here, and, you know, we want to continue marching on, and we will continue marching on.
Agree with everything that's been said. by my two panelists, co-panelists. But I think the other thing is, is educate, educate, educate. Talk to. Keep talking to the new governor, the incoming governor. Keep explaining, because you can guarantee, sure as eggs are eggs, the naysayers, the doubters will be talking to him as well. We'll be speaking to him every day about what's going on. There'll be the fake news. I'll use that terminology. The fake news will be out there. There'll be, I think again, it was on a panel yesterday. If you say fake news enough, if you say a piece of fake news enough times, it becomes reality. The industry needs to do the opposite of that. Explain what's going on. Explain the realities of offshore wind, the good and the bad. There's a lot of good stuff about offshore wind. Some of the bad stuff is it's expensive to get going. Get them to understand and appreciate that. Get them to understand. Don't just say it's the best thing. It's going to save the planet. Anybody can say that. Give the facts, the data, the history, the knowledge, the good, the bad, the East Coast, the Europe, Asia, what's going on in Asia, what's going on in China. Explain all of that. Educate the full picture. That's the important thing. So they really appreciate, really understand what the industry is about and what it's trying to do and where it's trying to go and what it can offer the state.
One other angle on this, Chris, is that we do a lot of work in the technology center sector also, and represent Google and a whole bunch of folks. So, the governor is really concerned that we need to be keeping investments from the technology space, and that California maintains its presence as the home of that industry, and especially with AI developing. The whole data center question, if you look at the projections and the demands on electricity for data centers, the demand is going to go up dramatically. Offshore wind is a part of that solution. And for anybody running for governor, if they care about the technology space and don't want to lose our competitive edge and lose data centers to other parts of the country, which is happening now, offshore wind is part of that solution.
Yeah, and that's the key word there, Ed. Part. It's part of the solution. It's not the solution. It's not that or that. It's part of the solution going forward, and it's a key part. That's part of the education side of it. We're not trying to get rid of oil and gas. We're not trying to get rid of onshore solar. We're not trying to get, it's just part of it going forward, because the energy demand is going to go up with transport and data centers, AI, and all that kind of stuff. Demand is going to go through the roof.
Well, Tony, thank you for putting a fine point on this discussion, which has really been engaging. I wish we had more time. With that, if you could thank our panelists by a round of applause, I'd appreciate it.